Welcome back for season 5 of
A Couple of Multiples, the reality of dissociative identity disorder.
We are your hosts, Drew
And Garden System.
a married couple both living with DID. We are here to show the world the reality of navigating life with dissociative identity disorder, provide hope to those living with multiplicity and their supporters, and to help educate mental health professionals so that people can receive a correct diagnosis and appropriate treatment as quickly as possible.
Garden System works as a trauma therapist in Florida.
And Drew works with children and hopes to return to school soon to earn her PsyD.
In the article, Separating Fact from Fiction, an empirical examination of 6 myths about dissociative identity disorder, Brand et al. Sets the record straight on the following myths.
Myth number 1, DID is a fad.
Actually, DID has been recognized by the DSM for over 3 decades, and Brand et al. Discovered 1,339 publications about DID from the year 2000 through 2014.
Myth number 2, DID is primarily diagnosed in North America by DID experts who overdiagnose.
Brand et al. Cites studies on DID from a variety of countries around the world, and studies also show that it takes 6 to 12 years of being treated in the mental health system before one receives a correct diagnosis of DID. And Brand et al. Also discovered that multiple institutions routinely underdiagnose DID.
Myth number 3, DID is rare.
DID has a prevalence rate of 1.5% of the general population, which is higher than schizophrenia, bipolar, OCD, or anorexia.
Myth number 4, DID is an iatrogenic disorder.
There are no studies in any clinical population that support this myth, while Brand et al. Cites studies that show a strong correlation between trauma and dissociation.
Myth number 5, DID is the same as borderline personality disorder.
While there are a lot of similarities in symptoms, these are separate and distinct diagnoses.
Myth number 6, DID treatment is harmful to patients.
Brand et al. Cites studies that demonstrate that DID treatment is helpful across a wide range of clinical outcome measures, including a Norwegian inpatient trauma program that found that dissociated self states must be directly addressed in order to improve amnesia.
Now it's time to honor the voices of those living with dissociative identity disorder and to share their stories with the world. Reverend Carla Fleshman, she, LCSW, is the owner and clinical director of Transitions Delaware, a group practice centered on serving the LGBTQ+ community, whose motto is celebrating every identity, supporting every journey.
Reverend Carla is also a consultant in training with EMDRIA, available for consultation, specializing in dissociation, LGBTQ+, medical, religious trauma. Today's episode is brought to you by
Healing Selves Therapeutics, PLLC, a mental health practice located in North Carolina, specializing in the treatment of dissociative disorders and trauma. Healing Selves is committed to serving the plural population through the utilization of EMDR, clinical hypnosis, expressive arts therapy, and other evidence-based practices.
Healing Selves was established in 2019 and currently serves North Carolina and Florida. We are committed to extending accessibility and currently accept most commercial insurances, Medicaid and Medicare.
Welcome to another incredible season with Drew
and Garden System,
a couple of multiples.
The reality of dissociative identity disorder. Welcome to season 5. We are super excited to kick off this season with Dr. Frank W. Putnam, author of Old Before Their Time.
In a distinguished and sometimes controversial career that has encompassed research, treatment, and activism, child psychiatrist Frank W. Putnam has documented the long-term mental, physical, and social consequences of childhood maltreatment and neglect.
Part memoir, part call to action, Dr. Putnam's Old Before Their Time gives an inside look at a scientist negotiating the politics of established medicine and partisan politics in a quest to understand and heal wounded children and the adults they become. Putnam co-founded the pioneering Female Growth and Development Study, the FGDS, which for more than 3 decades has followed sexual abuse survivors.
The FGDS's rare longitudinal data about everything from morbid obesity to mental illness has informed more than 60 peer-reviewed articles, as well as Bessel van der Kolk's New York Times bestseller, The Body Keeps the Score. Childhood maltreatment, Putnam argues, is the largest preventable cause of certain major mental illnesses, interpersonal violence, and much hard drug abuse.
When we were approached about having Dr. Putnam as a guest, it quickly became apparent that the results of the FGDS were extremely important to share as we kick off a season dedicated to the voices of survivors. Welcome, Dr. Putnam. We're so honored to have you here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I feel honored to be here.
Fantastic. Well, I know we have a lot of great questions to ask you today.
All right, let's get started. How did you get involved in studying dissociative identity disorder?
Well, I was interested in rapid changes in individuals, and I'd seen seizures, and I'd seen panic attacks, and I'd seen switches between bipolar disorder. And I was on a ward that studied rapid switching bipolar disorder, and I sort of serendipitously discovered my first multiple. I thought that I'll never see another one. I shortly thereafter saw a second one. Thought, well, that's amazing. Shortly thereafter saw a third one. Said, okay, this needs to be looked into much more than is happening. So that's how I sort of switched from that. Though I've always been interested in what these rapid changes in emotional mental states. So I've continued to study those.
Oh, fantastic. So you continued to study. So you did something called the Female Growth and Development Study. Can you tell us what that is exactly?
Okay, so this came out of my work with adult multiples. All the adult multiples told me they'd been this way since they were children. And as far as they knew, they always had been this way. I reasoned that if that were true, I should be able to find child multiples. So I began looking for child multiples, and I saw something much bigger, which was the effects of child maltreatment on really children and child development. And so with a collaboration of the late Penny Trickett, who's a developmental psychologist, we started the Female Growth and Development Study. It's always kept that name as the sort of disguise, but it's really a study about the effects of child sexual abuse. And it consists of a group of about 90 sexually abused girls ages 6 to 15 coming into the study, and a matched group of non-abused girls who are matched on a variety of different things. And they've stayed with us for all these years, which we're really closer to 40 years. I say 35 years, but it's really closer to 40 years that we've all been together. They keep coming back. We still have a vast majority of them are involved. A few have died. And a couple are just missing. We don't know where they are. But most of them have stayed in touch with us. And we have seen them for intensive evaluations for 8 different times. And we've looked at the effects of child maltreatment, particularly child sexual abuse, on developing girls, essentially females. We've always wanted to do a male study. We never could get the money.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's amazing that you've had this study go on as long as you have. 40 years is like a long time. That's like almost my whole life.
It's been very hard. It's finding money has always been the difficult thing, sort of thing. But we've always had, a lot of cooperation, a lot of people giving time, energy. Yeah, but it's gone very well.
Awesome. That's wonderful.
Yeah, incredible. So I know we mentioned the boys. What about the boys? I know the money was an issue.
Well, money's been an issue. We have not been able to ever convince anybody that they need, and probably more that the girls they need to be studied. They have a very different experience generally. That is, most of the females are abused within the context of the home, and the boys are abused outside the home. And we found that relationship to perpetrator makes a huge difference. Also, age of onset, what happens to you. All these things do seem to have a lot of very powerful effects long term. We've been looking at a variety of things, a lot of biology, particularly developmental biology in terms of things like time through puberty, development of stress response systems. We've also been looking at cognitive development and how what essentially the growth of the normal growth of the IQ curve. And we've been looking at immune systems, and we've been looking at the changes in the body and a variety of different things over time. It's quite an intensive study, as well as looking at behavior in a variety of different scenarios, collecting data from schools, those sorts of things.
Yeah, there's so much to it.
Yeah, that's the problem, is that there's, about 50 different scientific papers, which is a lot of papers to assimilate. And they've come out over really these 30, 35 years or so. And so you've got to really, really chase it hard if you wanted to. So that's why I wrote the book, was to try to pull it all together as best we could.
That is fantastic. So what is unique about the ongoing longitudinal female growth and development study, which I guess we'll call it FGDS, that you co-founded, and what has been its most surprising finding?
Well, I think the most surprising finding is, and I apologize for my voice, it's frogging up on me, is that many of the changes that we found, changes in the through puberty, changes in the stress response systems, changes in cognition, could be explained and understood as accelerated biological aging. And we were able to sort of nail that finding looking at the genetics and looking particularly at a thing called epigenetics, the DNA. And that basically showed us that probably the largest effect across the board was accelerated aging. And that, of course, aging is the biggest risk factor for all sorts of things like cancer and heart disease and stroke and early premature mortality. So it's not, happy news exactly, but it's an important finding.
Yeah.
So that is our next question. What is biological aging? How's it measured? And what are its implications?
Well, when we started out, we were looking at systems that we could measure, like puberty. So we could look at the development of puberty, and we could show, in fact, that the sexually abused girls went through puberty about a year earlier on average, after we controlled for relevant sorts of variables. But now we can measure biological aging by looking at the DNA. And in particular, the DNA gets changed over time through a process called epigenesis, a genetic process. And there are a number of different things that qualify as epigenetic, but what we're looking at is a process called methylation, in which these chemical groups called methyl groups are attached to the DNA. And what they do is they don't change the sequence, but they change the expression, meaning that they change how the DNA is turned on or off. And so that essentially changes how the DNA is expressed in the individual. The thing about this is it can be passed on from one generation to another. So that these are real changes. Not only they happen after the person is, living along their life, but they are transferable to the next generation.
Wow.
Yeah. So like the children and grandchildren of the original subjects in the study are also having biological aging then?
Well, that may be the case. We don't know that yet. What we know is, and when I say that can be passed on, the real data is coming from rats. Okay, so we don't have that data really in humans. Yeah,
Okay.
but we do know that if you stress baby rats, it changes this basically this epigenetic change, and that and then affects their offspring. The baby, when it grows up and becomes an adult, that is passed on to their offspring. So it's been followed for a few generations in rats. So when I say it can be passed on, we know that in animals. We haven't actually established that in people.
Okay,
Wow.
wow. So how does trauma biologically embed itself within victims, and what are the social, psychological, and physical consequences?
So I think one of the major systems that we found that's impacted that then has implications throughout the body and is the stress response system that's known as the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And this is the stress response system that gives you that hormone cortisol that you've probably heard about cortisol, and it gives you
Yeah.
adrenaline. So you get these two stress response hormones out of that. And what we've seen is that the trauma changes that system, and that system then interacts with other systems. We know cortisol, for example, interacts with metabolism and growth. And so that the change in the cortisol HPA axis, the cortisol system particularly, is linked, in what we call mediation. It mediates changes in body weight, for example, in the individuals, so that they are sexually abused girls gained weight much faster. They were much heavier. Um, than that, it affects cognition. We know that cortisol actually is very powerful, that acts on the brain, those sorts of things. So that's how, by changing the stress response system, by stressing this child very early, when that system is really just kind of coming online, we start have echoing changes throughout the body. Is that
Wow.
clear? I know it's a tough thing to sort of explain shortly.
There's a lot of big words there. I know
Uh,
some of them though.
yeah, tell me if if it's not clear. I need to learn how to
Yeah.
explain this better.
Well, I think it makes sense. You know, I understand the concept of cortisol and adrenaline and that flooding the body, and cortisol does lead to weight gain, and they've noticed that. Like when you think about studies done with women who have polycystic ovarian syndrome, they have higher levels of cortisol in their bodies as well. And I think a study about the link between PCOS and some of childhood maltreatment and things would also be interesting to conduct, because I've notice a lot of the people that I know with JD also happen to have PCOS on top of that. And I've seen that happen a lot too.
Right, right. Well, when you know people and you know their histories, and you begin to see patterns, and that's what I was seeing in these children. I looked at probably 100 children plus 100 plus children looking for dissociative children. I found a few, but I really saw a lot of other kind of damage, and I said this needs to be looked at, but it needs to be looked at going forward in time. That we can't sort of reverse engineer this. We have to look forward in time.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, what is the most important finding from the FGDS that mental health professionals need to know and understand?
Well, I think one is that it really nails this idea that trauma affects the body. I mean, for a long, long time, people didn't take trauma seriously, and then it became, well, okay, it's a psychological thing, but get over it. It happened to you all these years ago. That kind of response, and then people began to take that more seriously. Now we're seeing this really has very profound effects on health and welfare, and that individuals who have had these experiences are at higher risk for developing certain kinds of disorders and medical conditions, and that they deserve to be followed more carefully, and that you need to think about this as a really important part of your medical history, in the same way when they ask you about, well, what did your father die of, what did your mother die of, who in your families had this, who in your families had that. This is what you've had, and it's affected you in profound ways, and the doctors need to start to assimilate that knowledge. Now, the issue is you may know that, but they may not. It takes a while for an idea like this to permeate the medical system.
I mean, that makes so much sense. I mean, I was in grad school just a couple of years ago, and I remember watching a video my professor showed us featuring, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and he was talking about getting into trauma, and he was saying how everyone told him there was no future in trauma, and he needed to find something else to study. And now look, here we are.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the positive things is that I started out when it was at best considered a social problem. And now it's a legitimate scientific problem.
Yeah. So great work getting that on the map for everybody.
Well,
thank you for doing all this work.
Well, a lot of people did this work. I know I'm not quite alone.
So how will the FGDS guide trauma treatment modalities and interventions?
I think in the long run, it'll have a lot of impact, but it will take a while for all of that. I think the first thing is it gives us a pretty quick measure of trauma. That is, we can now go in and look at this epigenetic DNA and say, was this, are we looking at biological aging here? And if we are, the very likely source is, in fact, a traumatic source. Now, different organs age at different rates. So your brain ages at a different rate than your heart and your kidneys and your pancreas and your immune system. And so we really have to understand much more about how trauma affects different organ systems and different aging patterns. And maybe there are differences in terms of types of trauma or when it started or things like that cause it to affect different systems in different ways. It may be if it starts early, it affects, the stress response system. If it starts later, it affects the immune system. I'm just making that part up. I don't know that. I'm just saying it's likely that there are going to be things like that we have to learn. And I think but it will give us another window into the effects of trauma on the body that we will, and it's a relatively easy window to tap. That is, we can do these measures, they're called clocks, and begin to collect clocks on different organs and follow them. We already know that if you come into an emergency room as an adult and you've been traumatized, and we draw your blood and we measure your clocks, and you have already accelerated aging, you're much more likely to develop PTSD. So already this is predicting a risk for PTSD from that trauma. So, and I think that's just the beginning of what we may be learning from this particular work.
That is like new information for my brain, like our organs age at different rates.
I know, that got me too. I'm like, whoa.
Oh, you didn't? Well, I know that. You're going to see moving onto the market all these clocks, and people will be able to look at their biological aging. Already there are companies developing kits like the DNA kits, Wow. Some of it is just, a sham. They measure one organ and they assign that to you in general, but you really need to measure different organs and understand that, and this is why some people become demented earlier or other people develop cancer earlier, or, that these organs age at different rates, particularly things like the cardiovascular system.
So this biological aging is all internal organs. Like, we're not talking about looking old externally then.
Yes, we are, actually.
We are.
Biological aging depends, if it happens to be affecting your skin or your hair or something like that. One of the things I often do is to look into common language. And one of the things in common language is about how trauma makes you go gray before your time. And of course, there's truth to that. And
I already have gray
hair. Well, it's there's truth to the effect that trauma ages, and whether it's aging your heart or your hair, it's affecting some different kinds of systems. And what every once in a while, when you're seeing some really traumatized kids, you see they have gray hairs. It's really freaky, but it's a statement about what they've been through.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
when you see a young child with sort of premature graying, people have not tied that to trauma, but they should be looking more closely at whether that's overt sign of trauma. We don't see a lot, but I've seen kids with gray hair.
Wow.
Wow. Hmm.
I have a lot that's percolating in my head now.
I think our listeners probably do too.
Well,
Yeah.
it's a revolutionary study, and I don't take credit for it in the sense that it was Penny Trickett, Jenny Knoll, and I were the three who did it, but we had, I don't know, 40 or 50 collaborators, maybe more than that, over time, in different people who had expertise in different areas. So we had people with expertise in the epigenetics, people with expertise in the cortisol, etc., who helped us. We had a lot of help.
Yeah. And
That's awesome.
I'm just thankful too for all the participants that agreed to be a part of the study too.
Absolutely.
And kept going.
And kept coming and coming. There was a time where we were able to compensate them for their time and cover their travel. We lost those kinds of funds, and they still kept coming, and they still kept participating. And it was a lot of work. I mean, we typically spent 6 to 8 hours with everybody every time they came through, and there were eight times when we evaluated them over those 35 years or so. And so it was a lot, and particularly when you think about the kids. And early on, we were drawing blood. No fun. Nobody, Later we could measure that many of the hormones in the saliva. So all you had to do was swab the cheek. But now, or actually, we'd have them chew a piece of gum, and they would have a cotton piece in there that would be soaked in it. But so there was a lot of discomfort. We also had some stress tests because we were interested in the cortisol and the stress response system. So there was, first of all, the just getting your blood drawn is a stress. Everybody sees that needle coming, and that freaks you out a little bit. And then we did a thing they called the tier social stressor, which you gave people a pretty impossible thing to do, and then you asked them to do it in front of people with clipboards and everything, to give a talk about this particular subject, and you're trying to produce a social stressor. And so we would look at the cortisol, rises in terms of response to stress. So yeah, they went through a lot. They really did. We're greatly appreciative of that.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So, what obstacles did you encounter in developing and progressing with the FGDS?
Money.
Money talk.
Money was very hard to get, always, and just keeping it funded was a real difficult thing. Keeping it funded for 35 years, because even when we weren't seeing subjects, we were analyzing data, we were storing samples, we were having samples analyzed. It's very expensive to have, these hormone samples analyzed, that sort of thing. Somehow we always were able to come up with the money. Some things we weren't able to finish as well as we liked, but we still did quite well. But we also got pushback from people who didn't think this was a real problem or was real science. And that still goes on. And there's a lot of pushback about looking into these questions. And you see it in our society even today about releasing files and stuff. Why we can't talk about this stuff. We can't bring this out. It makes people uncomfortable in various ways for various reasons.
Yeah, but bringing it to light is what's going to change it.
I believe that entirely, that it has to be talked about, it has to be brought to light, it has to be a topic of conversation. That's the only way we can start to break it.
Absolutely. I still find it so scary to discover and find out or hear about the pushback and the refusal to look at this, and we still face many clinicians today and psychiatrists today still want to roll their eyes and say DID isn't a real diagnosis. Like, we're still dealing with that today, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's really sad it hasn't been incorporated into the training better.
Right.
That's the real, problem, is that they're really both the child abuse and the DID part have not been incorporated. Now, one thing I think that's helped is just to sort of step back and talk about dissociation, and that's sort of more tolerable. It's something we can measure. It's something that we can show is correlated with trauma, etc., and that people have different amounts of it, and it affects treatment. And those are things that are sort of easier to assimilate for the doubters and the disbelievers. And so I think we're making progress there.
I agree. There's definitely progress that has been happening. So this is good. So in your book, you have that your book has recently come out, or right? It's come out now.
Yes, my book is out now. It's called Old Before Their Time.
Yeah. So I've read most of it now, and I just love the story of all the things that you went through to get this study done and the things you encountered. And I would love for you to share a little bit more with us about some of the hard times and the quote enemies that you kind of encountered in your attempts to conduct the research needed for FGDS.
Well, you probably know the name Paul McHugh. Don't do you? Paul has been Paul was chairman of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins and was one of the major people against the DID diagnosis. And we've been fighting Paul for 30 plus years. He just doesn't believe in it. He sets it up, and he was a very powerful, as chair of Johns Hopkins, he was a very powerful position in psychiatry. He held a lot of positions in different groups, and particularly one called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. You've probably heard of that.
Oh, we've heard of that, yeah.
Well, I'll bet you have. So have I. They have made my life quite miserable, and attack me everywhere they possibly can, and were really actually interfered with my career at points, and sort of thing. It's turned out okay for me, which is the great thing, which is it turned out some ways what they did turned out to let me free me up in a way that allowed me to do more of the things I wanted to do. But it cost me a job and a situation. But so they're out there. Now the False Memory Syndrome Foundation is gone.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, thank goodness. And Paul has, I think, been, discredited in many ways. And so it's really getting better, but we were facing both the DID pushback and the child abuse pushback, which are interconnected, obviously. And we had cases where they just didn't want to fund child abuse, and that's still true today. Is that it's very hard to get money to do research on child abuse. I've seen situations where money was available and nobody wanted to take it because they just didn't. That is, none of the institutes. Congress said, here's $40 million to study child abuse, and no institute at NIH would take the money because they didn't want to have that as part of their portfolio of science, that they would become responsible for child abuse research. Now, the one institute that stepped up is Child Health and Human Development, and much more than the National Institute of Mental Health, which has not, in my opinion, stepped up to looking at the effect of child abuse on mental illness writ large, not just on DID, but on depression and anxiety and PTSD and everything. But the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development has come forth with a number of very good grants in this area, including looking at biological embedding of trauma.
It's so important. It's so needed. There are so many people out there living with dissociation, a dissociative disorder. And even if they don't have a dissociative disorder, like there's still people out there that have experienced this maltreatment and abuse as well. It's so prevalent, and I think it is, I don't know if I have really good words for this, but like for somebody to be able to say, oh, I don't believe in it, it's just like, well, that must be nice for you, but I live with it. I don't have a choice. I experience it every single day, every single hour.
Yeah, exactly. It's incredibly prevalent. Actually, that's the thing. It's over and over again the data are 1 in 4 women have had unwanted sexual experiences before the age of 18, and some studies 1 in 10 men, 1 in 8 men, something like that, before the age of 18. So it's really very, very common. And there was really a really good piece in the New York Times by a woman named Amanda Mustard, and she did a video. Did you see it? She did this. Oh, she did this wonderful video about what child sexual abuse and how so much of it is actually familial, and it's Pop and Uncle Joe and etc. who are the perpetrators, and it's a really extremely well done piece. And one of the things she points out is about 90%, at least for females, is really familial, and as opposed to the trafficking that it gets more attention.
Yeah, it goes unseen when it's so close in the family.
Yes. So it was. She did a really excellent job. If you can run it down, it's Amanda Mustard, and it's about talking about sexual abuse in the family.
Yeah,
and about how it's often. Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little video opinion piece. It's very well done.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's good to have as many resources out there as possible. And hopefully, the results of the FGDS, along with some work that other people are doing, will help push there to be more research. Maybe people will start picking up funding.
We've been trying to do a treatment, randomized controlled treatment study for years and years and years. Bethany Brand, do you know Bethany's name?
Yes.
Okay.
I read her book, Finding Solid Ground.
Right. And so we've been evaluating that, and it's been basically all privately funded. Have not been able to get any federal grants for this kind of work.
It's so important, and what I appreciate about what Dr. Brand is doing is that it's, putting DID treatment on the map again, because somebody said in some research paper that specific DID treatment was harmful. And I think that's been the most harmful thing, is to say that.
Yes. And, is it real or is it a fantasy, suggestibility kind of thing? That battle's been going on back and forth for years and years and years and years.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah.
So what made you persevere in conducting the FGDS despite the challenges and opposition that you faced?
Well, I wanted. It was always felt to me like it was the right thing, and that I was a person who had the skill set and the situation to do that. And once it got going, it was clear that I was on the track of something really important. And that kept me going also. We were getting back data over and over again. We were getting back data saying, wow, there is a really profound effect here on the growth and development of these sexually abused girls. And we're seeing it compared to our matched comparison girls. And as we got farther along, we could see the interdigitation of how, for example, the cortisol changes and the stress response changes interacted with the growth and metabolism kinds of changes. And then later how that is connected to the epigenetic changes. So we began to see how one thing was connected to the next, was connected to the next, was connected. So it was really important to keep it going as best we possibly could.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
It is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's to see that. So what do mental health professionals need to understand about the effects of childhood sexual abuse and dissociative identity disorder?
Well, I think it's important for all basically mental health professionals to look for dissociation. And again, this idea of making it sort of like depression or anxiety, something we could measure, and that it has an impact on the individual, and these are some of the impacts. So having people do that, and then they will discover one of the most important things I've found in terms of trying to help people understand DID is to have them discover it for themselves. And so when I do a consultation, I don't say, your client or your patient has DID. I say, what, does she lose time? Does, this happen? Does that happen? Well, go ask about these things, and when you give the DES, the Dissociative Experiences Scale, ask when you come to these items that are marked high, ask for some for instances. And they discover it for themselves, and then they come back. You'll never guess what I found, Oh my goodness. And then they become a believer, and then they become an expert. I roll my eyes on that, because there are a lot of people who have one case and think they know everything. And what I know is that it's very, very different. There's a lot of different forms, and you should be careful about generalizing. But anyway, they've seen it. And once they've seen it, they can see it again, and they can see it again.
Right.
And then they become, and that's, I think, one of the important ways that we have to win people over is help them see it.
Yes.
Another way to help them see it is to help them look at the multiplicity of themselves. Because singletons are not single. They're just somewhat better integrated in the sense that they don't lose as much time. They do lose time in the sense that they can't always remember what they've done or what they said, or particularly when they have strong emotional states, when they get, say, angry or something like that, that often they do things that they don't remember or recall specifically. But they have different parts. They have different sides. They have different facets. They have put on their mommy hat. They put on their game face. And if they can understand that they themselves also have different parts or aspects that are not always in harmony, but may in fact be in conflict with, that they may have a better understanding of what it's like to have DID. Does that make
a way to do it?
That's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Hey friends, it's Garden System here, and we are super excited to announce that we are accepting new clients for those seeking trauma therapy and DID treatment starting in late spring and summer of 2026. Clients must be in Florida. Visit www.mindfulmultiplicity.com for more information and to join the waitlist.
Hi, friends. It's Drew. We want to invite you to come be a part of our private online community, Hearts Multiplied. We have message boards, live moderated chat rooms, and live events where community members get to interact with each other. There are spaces for everyone, whether you have lived experience or are a supporter or are a mental health professional. And you can upgrade to the Hearts Connect spaces for even more live events and a 24/7 live chat room. Visit acoupleofmultiples.com, click on Hearts Multiplied, and join an informational Zoom meeting to learn more.
Thank you so much for listening to
A Couple of Multiples. We hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. So tell us about the creation of the Dissociative Experiences Scale that we just talked about.
Well, that was, I was thinking for a while, I need a scale. I need to measure this. When I started in this area, we had what I'd call the great man theory, that we had different experts. Some of them were historical, like William James, and others were current, like Rick Cluft or others. And, they would tell you about it, but I was going like, how do I measure this? How do I, really, all I know is what they tell me. So I thought we needed to measure it, and I was presenting to a symposium at the American University. I like to talk to college students and grad students, and I was presenting, and Eve Bernstein came up and said, "What you really need is a scale." And I thought, "Yeah, she's on to that. That's exactly right." So she and I worked on it. It was her PhD dissertation. It's now Eve Carlson, and then the important thing was to get it out there, and to make let as many people have access to it as possible. So I published it in ways that you could in journals, so you could just Xerox the journal and you'd have the scale. I also made up packets of the scale that I could mail out to people. So if people contacted me, and this was before email or early email days, before you could actually send stuff by email. I would mail it out to people with a lot, and now it's widely used around the world. We lost track of the number of languages it's been translated into, years and years ago. But it's what I know is there are about 4,000 to 5,000 papers, scientific papers, peer-reviewed papers that have used it as part of their measurement battery. Now, there are other scales too, and then many of them are also pretty good at this point in time. But it was the first, and it was the first by a decade or more.
Yeah, I know the DES is something that I use pretty much with almost every client. Like, it's just standard. I check it with everybody that comes and sees me.
Yeah, and what you see is that there's sort of a lot of people have a little, and some people have a lot more, and you get this sort of there you get a curve. I can't see myself, but and that's, I think, important, is that this is not something that you either have it or you don't. This exists on a continuum. And some people have more than others, and some people are more dissociative at certain points in their life than others.
Mm-hmm.
Stress is one of those things that can set it off. And so, but again, if you look at that common language, people talk about falling to pieces, coming undone, losing. What are they really talking about? They're kind of talking about their integration in a way, and that's something that we associate with stress, and so a lot of times, if you look into the common language, you really see that these ideas are there. We just kind of pass over them as if they're cliches, but since they didn't start as cliches, when somebody says, "I was just beside myself," well, they were probably talking about, kind of depersonalization or a sense of being out of body,
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't even think of that with those things that people say, but it's so telling.
It is. It really is.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are the implications for mental health care and healing from trauma, considering the ongoing denial and stigma associated with dissociative identity disorder?
Well, I think that you can't expect the world to change for you. You have to basically take care of yourself, and that you we would, it would be nice if this was as well recognized as many other things are.
Yeah.
But for various reasons, it's not likely to happen in the near future. I think it's better, really much better than it was, say, in 1980, when it was
Definitely, yes.
Yeah, but So I think one of the implications is really you need to do whatever you all need to do to increase harmony inside, and it's not really. I don't think it's the multiplicity that's the problem. I think it's the PTSD, and it's the fact that the society isn't geared for people who don't have the same kind of stuckness in time. I mean, we live in a very linear society that expects everything to kind of flow in a very constant way and expects the constancy, and I don't think that was always true. And I think that in a way there was probably a time when multiplicity was the norm, and that as we've become more linearized in the sense that we're driven by the clock and you're expected to be pretty constant over time, that it's become more difficult to be multiple. But I don't think, as I said, the multiplicity is the pathology. I think it's the PTSD.
Right.
And it's the fact that the society isn't made for people, who are, us's.
I love that. Us's.
Yes.
How do you hope the findings of FGDS will affect the way mental health professionals perceive and treat dissociative identity disorder and the effects of childhood sexual abuse?
Well, I want them to take it seriously. I want them to take it very seriously. I want them to say this is probably the single most important thing to prevent. That out of it, if we prevent it, we prevent a lot of mental health problems. We prevent a lot of substance abuse problems. We prevent a lot of medical problems. We prevent a lot of social problems. And that people will be able to achieve what they can achieve much better. I mean, people are held back by these kinds of things, and not able to achieve their full potential. And so by taking it seriously, I think if you prevent one thing, it's preventing child abuse. And by preventing child abuse, you're preventing really a lot of mental health problems. You're preventing a lot of medical problems. You're preventing a lot of social problems. You're preventing a lot of substance abuse. I mean, you're preventing so many other things that we want to prevent, So whether you're preventing cardiovascular disease, you're preventing, those kinds of things that we think about. And so that's what I would want. And I think we build this scientific foundation on by sort of pointing out that trauma is causing this biological acceleration. I'm putting out a marker, and I'm saying this is how I think it works. I think time will tell, and science is really the replication. It's the fact other people have to find this also for it to really be true. I can say it's true in my data, but it's got to be more universally true than my particular findings. But I'm putting it out there and staking a reputation on it that this is that. And then I think if we take aging seriously, people take aging seriously, and so I think if you say this is affecting aging, people may say, well, okay, I get that. I don't want to age. You just look at all the commercials on TV about aging, I mean, so much of our society is around the fear of aging. So if you say this is, it accelerates aging, then people should take it more seriously.
Yeah, their little ears will perk up.
Yes. Make me younger.
Right. Well, that's potentially in the sense that some of these epigenetic changes are reversible. And so we don't know a lot about that. But it's potentially there that we could actually reverse some of this now that we understand some of the epigenetic changes and their contribution, and that we know that some of them are reversible. Then we could look at our trauma treatments and say, did they reverse anything? Did they change anything? that's work to be done still.
Yes. Looking forward to it.
So, in what ways do the effects of childhood sexual abuse cross generations?
Well, there are about 20 different variables associated with the intergenerational transmission of child abuse, child sexual abuse particularly. There are things like, were the parents abused? Are the parents using substance abuse? Is there a stepfather in the home? So the question is, which ones of these are really critical variables, and are the ones that we should be focusing our prevention on? And I think that the key here is actually working with mothers and infants very, very early, and working with this attachment process, because we do know that attachment, if we get type D attachment, type D attachment. So for the listeners, it's a particular, it's called disorganized, disoriented attachment. It's seen in about maybe 10-15% of infants and toddlers. It's very predictive of that person growing up and becoming dissociative, not necessarily DID, but dissociative. And that's something that we need to identify and intervene on. And what we found is that if you treat traumatized children, their parents get a lot better for also because particularly their mothers, or if you treat their mothers, the children get better. And so intervention should treat them both, and we should expect to see improvement. So we should be looking for, I think, mothers who are at risk, who have had these experiences, and this is where I worked with a lot of single teenage mothers that didn't have much prenatal care, were very poor and sort of demographically at risk, and the vast majority of them actually had sexual abuse experiences. And this was a program called Every Child Succeeds, and you can find it on the web. It's everychildsucceeds.org. And we worked on that as a prevention program, and working in a sort of mother-child, with mothers and children, sort of basically birth to age 3.
Yeah, makes sense.
It definitely does. This connection between mother and child. I think it's so important.
Attachment.
I'm just thinking about some people I've been working with. I have a mother and a daughter that I've been working with, and it's just really amazing to see how each of their own individual treatments affects the relationships and the family dynamics. And I remember that was one of the parts I read in the book too, talking about that attachment period, that first year, how important it was, like the concept of, trying to wait 1 or 2 years before having a second child, like really making sure each child in that first year has all the attention that they really need, because attachment is essential.
It is. Attachment is essential, and it really is actually, if you have to measure one thing that is going to tell you whether the adult is going to be dissociative, it's looking at that attachment. And particularly if the child infant toddler has type D attachment, then you're going to have a high probability that they're going to be significantly dissociative. Now, one of the things that there was a really good study that looked at some of this. It was called the Mother-Child Study. It was done in University of Minnesota, and they looked at mothers that were demographically at risk for having abused children. And at the end, they found this attachment relationship, as did Carlin Lyons Ruth with Harvard family pathway study. But what they also found was that those mothers who didn't have abused children were the mothers who talked about their abuse with somebody. It didn't have to be a therapist, it could be a best friend. It was this process of acknowledging that this happened to me, and putting words on it and understanding something about the impact on them that really increased their vigilance and protected their children from having the same things happen to them.
Wow,
That's really hopeful.
that is.
Yeah, well, no, it is really hopeful. And I think the other piece of data I want to stick out there that I've failed to was most people who were abused, most as parents, do not abuse their children. Okay, that's really, really, really important for people to understand, because a lot of people feel cursed, and what the percentages are. I've looked very hard at that, not just in our data, but did an extensive literature search at one point. It looks like it's about a 70-30 split. That is, 70% don't abuse their children, but 30% do. And not necessarily that they abuse their children, but their children are abused, in a sense that often this is a situation where the mother pairs up with some abusive man, predatory male, and so it's not that it's her failure to her vigilance, in sense to realize what's happening to her children, kind of
So
things.
it's kind of like when you don't talk about it and you don't share and you kind of live in this place of maybe even denial that it happened to me, then there's denial that it can happen to my child.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so it seemed like the thing that was most associated with it not happening to their child was talking to somebody. And again, it didn't have to be a therapist. It had to be, could be a best friend or somebody.
That is really good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of answered part of our next question.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. So it was, how often do victims become perpetrators? Because I really do think a lot of people think hurt people will hurt people, right? But and then please explain the family cycle of violence.
I would like to kind of rephrase, maybe instead of saying hurt people, maybe unhealed people who don't talk about it, people who don't.
Right.
That's probably where the danger really lies.
Yeah, I think that's a better reframe of that. Here's where I think male and females differ, in the sense that males, we talk about looking at our data, and Jenny Knowles sort of taking the lead in this, is that what we call traumatic sexualization happens to these children, and it can have a number of different expressions, but in the males, one of the expressions seems to be sexual offending. And so the males are at much higher risk to actually be perpetrators than the females are more likely to hook up with males who are like this, are perpetrators, and they don't seem to be vigilant, or they seem to be attracted in some ways. And this is something we don't really understand, except that they see people that they are attracted to, and then they have children with them. And then the case of the stepfathers are that often you'll see them being interested in the daughters or something, and marrying into the family. This is where I think the Amanda Mustard piece was so good, recognizing how much of this was really familial. And that's one of the reasons we don't talk about it, is because it deals with family secrets.
Do you have more to add to the family cycle of violence?
Well, one, it's very real. That's why I feel like we have to have intergenerational and multi-generational prevention programs to break this cycle of violence. And we have to understand what are the factors that lead to the perpetuation across generations. And I think one is recognizing vigilance, and helping mothers be more vigilant and protective. It may be unfair to mothers, but I think they have so much more leverage over their children than fathers do. Then I think talking about helping the mothers with their own trauma in that way, and working on developing better attachments are all the kinds of things I think that we need to do to break the family cycle of violence. I think the major driver seems to be still that if you were abuse victim, you're more likely to become an abuser. Most people don't. 70% don't. 30% do. But that 30% is 6 times higher than what we would call spontaneous. That is, the parents have not abused, but now become abusers. That 30% is much higher than, it's about 6 times higher than the regular, which is about 5% of the population. Sort of has kind of what we might call spontaneous child abuse, and often that's associated with stress. The other thing we can do as a society is reduce stresses on families. This is more important for physical abuse and neglect. But we really see for those physical abuse and neglect that socioeconomic situation has a lot to do with things, and that when we have situations like serious unemployment, the rate of child abuse injuries goes way up. Sorts of things, at least doubles or triples in some ways. So that things like the child tax credit are really important social interventions to reduce financial stress on families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So considering all of these things and considering, what people have gone through here that have dissociative identity disorder, like what message do you have for people who are living with DID?
Well, I think to work on internal harmony, to that's really what I think for everybody, I think in the sense everybody's got enough DID that you need to work on being, at peace with yourself, and working on how you solve problems, and being kind to each other inside and outside. Kinds of things is what I would say. I would caution people not to put it out there and try to convince the world that they need to take DID seriously. I think you take care of yourself, and time will make this more acceptable or more better acknowledged. It's already so much better than it was. And the fact that you're able to do things like this podcast are really important in terms of normalizing things.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's been the biggest key, and we hear this across the board all the time: internal communication, internal cooperation. I like internal harmony, internal peace, and I think it's really important to, like, if you're going to achieve internal cooperation or have any kind of internal harmony, acknowledging all of yourselves, getting to know all of yourselves, that is so important. And I think there's still a lot of clinicians that still want to, quote, only talk to the host in
Right,
session.
right. I can't deal with all the others.
Right. Well, some are easier to deal with than other selves, but like, you got the difficult ones are who you need to be talking to.
Well, there we go. And usually they're not so difficult if you pay them the honor of talking to them, or the respect of talking to them, I guess, is really what you want to do, is that you respect them, and then they're not so hostile. No, it's. I think the field's moved on beyond that. I mean, there was a time, well, if I could get rid of all those other and just keep this one, everything would be fine. How do we make these? You can't make them go away. You cannot do that, and that's a fear I know that some have about treatment, is that they'll make my other parts go away or something. Or can't happen. Doesn't happen.
No.
We're not cutting off our arms and legs here. Like, they're all part of us.
Yeah, all selves are important.
Yeah, they are. They are, and it's really that harmony, that working together, that communication. That's that integration piece, and that's really, I think, only maybe Buddha is like totally integrated. Everybody else is still got parts and sides and pieces and whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what I had a question I was going to kind of throw in here and add, and I feel like I've just lost all the words to it. I'm thinking, like I have some colleagues in some of my trauma consort groups that are just very insistent on only speaking to the host, and think that they can do like either like a hypnosis thing or a quick like visualization, be like 1, 2, 3, you're integrated kind of thing. And what do you want to say to clinicians who are still pushing to only talk to, quote, an adult self, or whoever they think the host or legal or core self is?
That sort of thinking went out in the 1990s. That we moved beyond that idea that there's a host, and that host needs to be the one that we work through and address, etc. You're working with a system, and that system will have a metaphor, and you need to work within that metaphor.
Oh, that's what I wanted to say. I have the words again now. I think there is this fear that if they talk to individual selves, like somehow they're encouraging or increasing dissociation, or somehow creating DID in people that didn't actually have it. And I think some people need some reassurance that, like, if they don't have DID, you're not going to create it just by naming selves or things like that.
Yeah, then that is a real fear. And one of the things I say is, well, you're not afraid to ask about hallucinations, and you don't believe if you ask about hallucinations, you're creating hallucinations, or if you ask about delusions, you're creating delusions. What makes you think you're so powerful you could create alter selves?
I love it. That's going on a Canva later.
Yeah, it sure is. We're going to quote you on that one.
Nice.
All right. So what are your recommendations for reducing and ultimately eliminating the scourge of child abuse and family violence in this country?
Well, I think what I've been saying is I feel like we need to put a lot of effort into prevention. If it doesn't happen, then we've reduced family violence, we've reduced dissociation, we've reduced depression, we've reduced all sorts of diseases, we've reduced substance abuse. I mean, there's just so many good things that could come out of preventing child abuse. That's and I think the best way to do that is to focus on multi generations. Primarily, say, mother and child, but certainly family, so that you're working with children and families where there's been family violence, and your idea is we need to stop this now. We need to help heal the children. We need to help heal the adults, and we keep this from happening in the next generation. And ultimately, and it may take a number of kind of generations to keep reducing that until we basically get it down to nothing, basically. I mean, that would be my goal, is not that we just kind of lower it a little bit, but that we really eliminate it. Now that's pretty, but we would do so much good.
Yeah, wouldn't that be something?
I wonder how many diagnoses in the DSM would still exist if we got rid of and prevented childhood maltreatment.
So You know about the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences study. Everybody does in this area. They did. I don't think they ever published this, but I asked one of the people, Robert Anda, who was the second author on the original paper. I said, if you were to reduce child abuse, how much would depression would go away? For example, because they had pretty good data on depression. And he did this. There's some way to do this statistically to look at what's called attributable risk. And basically, it was about 50% of depression in women would disappear if there was no child abuse. And so that gives you a sense of, and this is probably the second most costly disease by some people's standard, cancer being or heart disease being. But it's certainly a very costly, painful disease. So talking about eliminating 50% of a major depression cases if you could eliminate child abuse. And likely there would be many other sort of examples like that, but that's the only one I really know sort of statistically.
Nice. Yeah. So behind me, I have your book. Oh, I can't hear me. Behind me, I have your book.
Oh, yeah.
So it is now available for purchase. So where can people get a copy of your book and tell people a little bit about your book?
Well, the book I say the book is a primer on child abuse, child sexual abuse disguised as a memoir. So the study we've been talking about, the female growth and development study, sort of forms the core of the book, and around that is sort of wrapped narrative of my life and the experiences of not only just doing this study, but also running these different programs, a program for investigating child abuse, a program for preventing child abuse, other kinds of research programs. So it's meant to be more readable, sort of general science, not a lot of deep science. Some graphs in there showing that if you really spent the time with this graph, you would learn a lot. For example, we have a graph in there showing ages of onset and duration for the girls in our study, and it's shocking. The average age of onset is 7, and the average duration is 2 years, with a frequency of once or twice a week. So that's a couple hundred episodes, but some are in there for years and years and years. Literally maybe 500 episodes, 1,000 episodes. People have no idea how massive this trauma is. Kinds of things. So that's the book. It's really meant to pull together roughly 50 scientific papers that are spread over time and across different journals, from different as child development to gerontology. So real differences. You'd have to really work hard to put it all together. So that's what the book attempts to do. As well as express my opinions.
There's some good opinions in there.
Definitely.
Thank you.
So how can people find and follow your work?
I have a website. It's not particularly, it's got papers, citations on it, and some things you can download. For example, all the scales I developed, you can download. Some other kinds of discussions. It's one word, frankputnam.com. So frankputnam.com. It's going to be populated. I just haven't had time to really build it up in the way. I've been kind of busy. So it's that would be probably, if they're interested in the science, there are references in the book, and then they're on the web page. There are a list of all the references for publications for the study, all the peer-reviewed papers for the study.
Fantastic. So what is one last thought that you would like to leave with our listeners today?
Well, again, I'd go back to, take care of yourselves. Be really good to yourselves. Be good to others. Be kind inside and outside. That's
Be kind, yes.
Be kind inside and outside.
There's a lot of places around us that have this little white sign and it says be kind and it has a red heart on it. And I see that everywhere. And I think that is just a beautiful message. Just be kind.
Yes. Okay. Well, it's been great talking with you guys. I'm glad to have another chance to meet you and talk with you all.
Yeah.
We're so glad to have you.
Yeah, this has been an incredible and in-depth discussion. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Putnam.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, dear listeners, for hanging out with
a couple of multiples. Reverend Carla Fleshman, she, LCSW, is the owner and clinical director of Transitions Delaware, a group practice centered on serving the LGBTQ plus community, whose motto is celebrating every identity, supporting every journey.
Reverend Carla is also a consultant in training with EMDRIA, available for consultation, specializing in dissociation, LGBTQ plus, medical, religious trauma. Today's episode is brought to you by
Selves, Therapeutics, PLLC, a mental health practice located in North Carolina, specializing in the treatment of dissociative disorders and trauma. Selves is committed to serving the plural population through the utilization of EMDR, clinical hypnosis, expressive arts therapy, and other evidence-based practices.
Selves was established in 2019 and currently serves North Carolina and Florida. We are committed to extending accessibility and currently accept most commercial insurances, Medicaid and Medicare. Thank you, dear friends, for spending time with us today.
We're so grateful for each of you and all the important work you're doing, whether it's supporting others or navigating your own healing journey. We hope this episode brought insight, encouragement, and something new to consider.
And if it did, we'd love for you to share it with a friend, your therapist, psychiatrist, or colleagues. It's one more step toward changing how the world understands DID.
And just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for therapy. Listening does not create a therapeutic relationship with the hosts or any guest speakers.
And most importantly, remember that every system is different. What works for one may not work for another, and that's okay. Your journey is valid, your healing is real, and we're so glad you're hanging out with
a couple of multiples.